If you want to get anywhere near Georgia, you've got to get Georgia guys. That's what Dave Aranda is trying to do. Let's get Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by Game Time and part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and the Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. Today, we're looking at who could be the next piece to the puzzle here for Baylor's coaching staff and why this guy should be a very hot name in the coaching carousel. Plus, we're going to talk with Pete Souza. We're going to look ahead at the matchup with Arizona for Baylor basketball tonight, late night tonight, and then take a look back at the things they've done well the last couple of games that could make Baylor a contender for the Big 12 championship again. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. Starting with what Baylor needs to figure out in terms of their coaching staff and finalizing that. Again, I called it pieces to the puzzle. Really, Baylor had all but about two pieces to the puzzle. That's the way it felt this year. Obviously, it all started late, right? Like half the puzzle got soggy at 2-4, but they kind of put it together. And then at the end, they're like, "Damn, we're missing two pieces." And that's why you're sitting there at 8-5 rather than 10 wins or competing for a playoff spot, competing for a Big 12 championship. And so they identified these two puzzle pieces as being outside linebackers and defensive backs, specifically cornerbacks. So Kevin Curtis for cornerbacks, gone. Been replaced. Paul Gonzalez comes in here from TCU, leaves TCU to come to Baylor because he wants to win championships. We get that. We totally understand that. And now needing to replace outside linebacker. This was a name that came in over the weekend, but still nothing has become official. 247 was reporting that it would be Carson Hall from Western Kentucky, which is a staff that Baylor's familiar with. They got Jamar Chaney from there last year. They also brought in a couple players, Jaquez Evans, who has since re-entered the portal, and Kendrick Simpkins, who has decided to stay another year. Carson Hall is the guy that they're looking at. He's the defensive line coach at Western Kentucky right now. So why then would he come in to be the outside linebackers coach? Well, a couple of reasons. First thing, we've talked about it on the show before. As a defensive line coach, it's not just plugging up the middle. Like defensive line coach, you are looking at pass rushing. And that's what Baylor needs from their outside linebackers. That's one of the reasons. The other reason is because Carson Hall played linebacker in college. Played for a guy called Kirby Smart at the University of Georgia. And before we go any further with his resume, I'd just like to ask you this one question. Who is the best coach in college football? I'll wait. Yes, correct. It is Kirby Smart. He's the most accomplished coach right now, him and Dabo Swinney. And I would say Kirby Smart's program is probably in a better spot, even with Carson Beck leaving, than Dabo Swinney's is right now in a tougher conference. Let's be honest, call a spade a spade. I talk about the SEC bias a lot. It is better than the ACC. And so here you got a guy in Carson Hall who played for Kirby Smart and then coached under Kirby Smart. And all the guy has done is win. Okay? He goes to a national championship game as a player. Then he becomes a grad assistant at Valdosta State. By the way, Valdosta, Georgia, one of the great football towns in the entire country. Serial winners at the high school and the college level, Valdosta State being one. Okay, so he goes to Valdosta State 1 year. All they do is win the D2 national championship. He literally plays in the national championship game in January of 2018. And in December of 2018, he's winning a national championship at the Division II level as a coach. So then he goes to Georgia. And, well, eventually. He does make a stop at LSU post Dave Aranda, makes a stop at Illinois. Eventually, he's at Georgia. And in his 2 years at Georgia, all the Bulldogs do is go 29-1 and win 2 national championships. The kid is hot, and all he does is win. And so much so that 247 put him on the top 30, under 30 just this year, just this season. Because he is still a kid, okay? And I've seen that 30 under 30 before. Remember Kenny Dillingham being on that list. He's doing all right for himself now. And this is part of the press release from Baylor, but it's part of his time at Georgia. Hall mentored multiple elite defensive linemen at Georgia, where the trio of Trayvon Walker, Jordan Davis, and Devontae Wyatt were all first-round picks in the 2022 draft. Think about that. He's a D-line coach at Georgia. They have 3 defensive linemen go in the first round. Like that in and of itself, this guy is breeding winners. Man, a winner breeding winners. We talked about it with Paul Gonzalez from TCU, having the Thorpe winner, having 6 safeties in 7 years, be drafted into the NFL. Baylor is making a factory now. They have the expectations for championships. Okay? Talk about a guy with a couple rings on his finger. Carson Hall. Paul Gonzalez helps TCU get to the national championship game. This is what you need to go after. And if you want to be skeptical, you could say that Dave Aranda should have been bringing these guys in a couple years ago. Sure. But what we're seeing now is a commitment. And specifically, I would say the writing on the wall here is a financial commitment. They have committed to paying players, and they're getting better prospects. They have committed to paying these assistant coaches well, which Mac Rhodes has talked about in the past, that they are very into doing. And they're getting better assistant coaches. Carson Hall, the only downside of this, if he does end up with the Bears, which at the time of recording on Monday night, that has not been made official. But if Carson Hall is here with the Bears, the only downside is he might not be here long. Because if he succeeds here as the outside linebackers coach, he is going to be a defensive coordinator at the Power 4 level in no time. No time at all. And maybe the best case scenario is Matt Powledge, has his name thrown into some other jobs last year like he was this year. And then Carson Hall's your next defensive coordinator. But this is a shooting star, man, a rising star, I guess is a better way to put it. A 30 under 30, one of the best 30 coaches in college football under the age of 30, according to 247, who knows a thing or two about these things. And he is coming to the penitentiary of Dave Aranda, which is a good thing. Oof. Some of y'all might not think that Dave Aranda is a defensive genius anymore, and that's okay. I'm still clinging on to that, even though it was, really not a good last 2 years defensively. I'm still clinging on to that because I'm old enough to remember 2021, and in fact, his time as the LSU defensive coordinator too. He is building a staff with either rising stars like Carson Hall here, or established, excellent positional coaches like Paul Gonzalez. This staff is going to be legendary potentially. Like this could be like when in that NFL Network of Football Life, if you've ever seen the one about the Cleveland Browns when they were moving away, and it was Belichick's staff, and it was all these future head coaches and executives with Dimitroff and Pioli and Kirk Ferentz and Jim Schwartz, and defensive coordinator who left to go coach at Michigan State. What's his name? Nick Saban. That's what Dave Aranda could be building here with these kind of moves. And it's only going to make Baylor a championship contender. It's not going to make Baylor better. It is going to make them a true contender. If these were the 2 missing pieces and these are the 2 coaches you replace them with, those are major upgrades. No offense to anyone that was on the staff before. These are massive upgrades, like guys that other teams are certainly looking into their services. Okay. I think people were probably scared of Paul Gonzalez because they thought he's not going to leave TCU. It's been there 13 years. Oh, but the guy wants to win championships? All right, come to Baylor. Oh, a guy who's won like at every level he's been at in Carson Hall? Sure, let's bring him in too. Man, this could be a scary good staff for the Baylor Bears. We're hoping that men's basketball turns scary good, and they're not close to that yet, but they've shown us some good things over the last few games. And now they get a real test late night tonight. Pete Souza is going to join Locked On Baylor to break that all down, what he's liked about them and how he feels about tonight going into Tucson and facing Arizona. That's coming up next on Locked On Baylor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff games is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of past playoff games and can't wait to make new memories with the updated format and extra teams involved. Of course, that one game being left. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I'm using it for a couple weeks. Again, another hockey game. I know you guys love hearing about that. But what I loved about it was I could see the end where the Blackhawks shoot twice. I could see the all-in price as I toggle that in the app. And I'm not being blindsided by hidden fees, and I get that view from the seat before I hit purchase, and it's telling me what the best deals are. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Now on to our conversation with Pete Souza. Pete Souza of The Pete Souza Show, ESPN, Inside the 12. I've never met someone more Inside the 12 than the great Pete Souza. He's a big Howard Cosell fan, too.
So the consummate professional.
They got the kid from Philly, Pete Souza, on the call.
I watched him on Inside the 12. He was like a piece of furniture.
That wasn't bad. That was pretty good. I think we got Howard Cosell. Oh, man. Anyway, Pete Souza joining, talking a little bit of hoops. We're also going to throw some football at you because you are, a former college football player and you have accidentally worn a Colorado shirt today. So we love that. We're yes, R.I.P. Coach Mack. I don't know how many current Colorado fans following the stuff this year, unfortunately, knew a lot about Coach Mack. I hope they do because Coach Mack obviously imperative to the success of that program and therefore that university. So
if anybody wants to know about him, the Book of Mac, great ESPN 30 for 30 from 2018, I think, or 2017. It's really, really good.
It is fantastic. And I'm sure the Baylor fan base would love a lot of that. But Pete, you are out in Tempe. You're doing Arizona State on this Tuesday game. That's who Baylor just played. Now Baylor plays Arizona. We know you've done some Arizona games this year, so I do want to get to that from you. But first, let's talk a little bit of Baylor. They survive in Tempe on Saturday. You had their game against Cincinnati on Tuesday, and I thought both of those games looked pretty similar. Baylor did not shoot the rock all that well, and it makes us wonder what kind of offense their guards are going to give them. But they clamped down both those games defensively, obviously for the Arizona State game, to the exception of the last few minutes. They really showed a lot, both man and zone defense, but specifically man. So I want to get your takeaways from being courtside with Chris Spatola last week against Cincinnati, what you saw from Baylor and turning around from that awful Iowa State loss.
I saw a team that was, how you say, well, we want to take what they give us. And that's all well and good until you can't capitalize on what they're giving you, which is what Baylor experienced at Iowa State. I mean, first of all, that was kind of a good time to play Iowa State. Students were still gone. From what I heard, it was not like the craziest environment.
Right.
I heard from folks around the Baylor staff, that was a game where it wasn't like Stores, and it wasn't like earlier in the season in Washington State where they played Gonzaga. And it's not a knock on Ames and Hilton Magic. It's literally like the students weren't there. It's a different vibe. You've experienced that. Mm-hmm. As far as the floor was concerned, there were way too many nonsensical shots from the outside. But people from Baylor staff would say they made sense because, let's take Norchad Omier for an example. They are so, we all are, not they. Baylor's coaches, us. Analytics, stats drive so much of what we do now today in life and especially in sports. And, the shot tracker, I guess, tool that they use was moving Norchad to shoot those. It would make sense for him to take those shots, the threes that he was taking. And also the dreaded, he made them all in practice and he made them all in preseason, And
against Air, he was lighting it up.
So we had a chance to talk with Coach Drew about that a little bit. And in typical Scott Drew fashion, he blamed it on himself. Like almost, hey, I was a little too footloose and fancy free and pushing him to shoot those shots because they were open. And he said, let's just say he and I have had a conversation between now and then, or between then and now. So there was I think that Coach did what coaches do, right?
By the way, I would love to hear that kind of conversation from Scott Drew, right? Because we all see Scott Drew, but he has to have those. He's a very successful head coach. He's got to lay down the law sometimes. I just want to see what that looks like. That's all.
So do I. Yeah. So do I, dude. Because even when he's talking to Spatola and myself, and that was the day when Fran Fraschilla was in town. So Fran actually popped over to the game. So it was Spatola, Fran, and myself talking to Coach Drew. I was like, those are the kind of conversations where you kind of don't want to be there. Fran, I see your eyes darting. Fran had called the Houston game the night before. So he wanted to come watch a practice. Yeah. So
and he was at the game too. Yeah.
And so I'm trying to almost not be there where those three are talking because it's Coach Drew, Chris Spatola, and obviously Fran. And I'm like, Coach Drew knows me, but I'm not like those three guys are having dinner somewhere over some spaghetti and a bottle of wine, like telling people where the bodies are buried and all the amazing secrets of what being a head coach and being, a coach. Spatola coached for Duke for a while, as part of the national championship run in 2010. So I'm just trying to be there. And I could tell Coach Drew, like throughout the conversation, is mindful that I'm there. But I'm not going to share anything like super like off the record with you even. What he was saying, but I was very fortunate to be a part of that conversation. And Coach Drew, who is usually, it's who he is. I think he's a little like me, like he's just genuinely happy and positive. It can be a little silly, but it was a different vibe that day before the Cincinnati game. He ran the shoot around, like hands on, ran it. And he was very particular in mentioning things like the Norshad thing. Right, like the shot selection. Also, they were down guys.
Yep. Short-handed.
Celestine and I was wrong about Love. I figured I saw him play against Utah. The way he was throwing his body around, I was like, oh, this guy's no. It was like a step backwards after that game. And I feel like the story with Jalen Love, for the rest of the year, or Langston Love. What am I talking about? Langston Love.
You just put them together, Celestine and Love. It's one injury. Yeah.
So I watched the Packers game last night. So, but I feel like he's going to be day to day just for the rest of eternity as a Baylor
probably
player.
Yes.
But I think that's kind of how it's going to be. And what does that mean? Well, that means it's time for Baylor to never move on from Langston Love, but to figure out how they're going to win full time without him. And I think we've turned the page on that.
And that's what, and I'll give you a pass because you
turn the page to that.
Right. I'll give you a pass because you saw this after we did the recording last week, but that's kind of what I was trying to get at in terms of like, right. You don't want to move on and say, oh, he's not part of this, but how do we win without him being our sixth man? Like maybe he can help us out as a seventh or eighth guy in the rotation. And that is great for Baylor, but how do we move on as to, playing without him? One more thing before we get on to Arizona. Defensively, it looked like a different team. They looked, for the first time this year, they looked very switchable. And we're going to talk about another center they faced against Arizona State, Quaintance, who didn't have much of a part of the game. But you saw it with Bandego from Cincinnati. Just didn't really have his fingerprints on that game. And there was a couple of points that Spatola was pointing out where they had like Rob Wright on him or Jeremy Roach on him on the switchability, and ball denial was there. Did you see some growth defensively from Baylor?
I saw more connectivity for sure and more communication. And you mentioned being switchable and then, guarding the ball screens, guarding like that's like, I keep hearing coaches talk about that. That's the new thing. It was, I'm trying to think, live ball turnovers was a thing you always heard like 2 years ago. Obviously you still hear it, but can a guy guard the ball screens? You know what I mean? Like that's a huge deal now. And I think Baylor was doing that really well. There was a menacing feel to the Baylor defense against Cincinnati. It felt like they were in every passing lane. And remember, this is in Norfolk State, Cincinnati. Cincinnati team was ranked 16th a week before, and that was a couple baskets away from maybe being a top 10 team. I mean, they barely lost to Kansas State, and they just came out flat at home against Arizona. Now we're getting in the time machine, but this is a decent team,
Yes.
And Baylor came out and got all over their ass, which was like also very refreshing. You and I talked. That was one thing I got right. You said, "What do you want to see these guys do? Get out to a fast start," and they
Finally
did that.
Yeah.
And Edgecombe playing downhill is amazing, and Norshad doing what he does best is amazing. Like that was lethal, dude. And they, like what we mentioned, they were down guys, and they played with 6 or 7 guys at home, like an inspired team. And that was another thing Coach Drew told us. He said, taking 6 or 7 guys out on the road, and you saw that, right, going to overtime against Arizona State. Even though Arizona State came back, they did have to come back, but it's tougher on the road. At home, it's you can play down a guy or two and get that juice from the crowd. Those are Coach Drew's words, not mine. But whatever it is, these past 2 games have been best case scenario after the Iowa State game, when you consider that they've been dinged up a little.
Absolutely. And we talked about the 3-game stretch after Iowa State, that 4-game stretch that looks pretty favorable for Baylor. You're through half of it. Now you've got an interesting one Tuesday night, Baylor at Arizona. Let's talk about the Wildcats next. Locked on Baylor. Today's episode is also brought to you by WayFair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space is therapeutic. It's great for me. It gets me back into my routine. So whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or you just want to give space a new look to start the year, what? That doesn't make any sense. WayFair has everything you need, all within your budget. Honestly, guys, I'm looking for some things to spruce this up. We don't have a lot of space here. Would love to spruce up this area here. WayFair is a great way to look at that. The free and hassle-free delivery, even for large items, is what really whets my appetite. There's something for every style and every home, no matter your space or budget. Give your home the refresh it needs with WayFair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WayFair.com. WayFair, every style, every home. Pete Souza with us, ESPN, Inside the 12, the Pete Souza Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. He is covering it all and doing a lot of hoops this year. You've actually done Arizona before.
Yes, sir.
You've been out there to Tucson and covered the Wildcats. This was one that was circled on the calendar when the schedule came out. These were 2 teams ranked inside the top 10 to start the season. And lo and behold, Baylor sneaks in at number 25 in the poll on Monday. And Arizona State is Arizona. Ooh, bad. Arizona is on the outside looking in. What do you expect from this matchup tonight in terms of just a quality standpoint? These are 2 teams that are looking for kind of their footing and their best case scenario. They've both won double-digit games already, but haven't gotten the big ranked wins yet.
I mean, I think with Baylor, the trouble is going to be, because we mentioned they're surging defensively. First of all, I'm so interested to see how these teams are handling this Arizona swing. Like at the end of the year, we're going to have a body of work where we could say, okay, it's almost like a back-to-back now. Mm-hmm. All these teams are going out to Arizona and playing Arizona State and Arizona, or Arizona and Arizona State in whatever order. And it's going to be neat to see like the toll this takes on teams, or how they play in the second game or how they play in the first. Obviously, Baylor won a double overtime game against Arizona State. So is there a little fatigue playing another game on the road away from home, right? Especially when we talked about it, you're a little dinged up. Arizona is dangerous because they've figured out how to win when Caleb Love isn't unbelievable.
They have.
I called the TCU game. It was the first conference game ever at the McHale Center, and it was rocking. It was so cool. Caleb Love had 33 points, 7 assists, 7 rebounds, and no turnovers. He played out of his mind. But over the course of the past couple games, even that Cincinnati game, he had a big bucket down the stretch, but it was mostly Bradley, Del Orso, those other guys, those others, right, coming in for Arizona, playing well and helping carry the load. And I think that is what is going to, if Arizona is going to get a bump and get into the top 25 and play into March, those other guys are going to have to step up and play, because the thing about Caleb Love is there's inconsistencies all around his game. He's so exciting, and there's a reason he's a preseason All-American. Guy played in a championship game, like big minutes, right, for North Carolina.
Yep.
But there are questions around his consistency. And that is something that Baylor could exploit. But when you do exploit that, you'd better be ready for some other guys to come up and have big games. It's not, hey, so goes Caleb Love, goes Arizona. No, I think you could say Caleb Love is somebody who could give you 30 a night and then give you 12 the next. And then if I'm Tommy Lloyd, I think I'm probably found other ways to win around that.
And it does look like both these teams have kind of found their footing. Arizona did have a tough non-con, not in terms of just the competition, but just what they did. They give up 100 to Wisconsin. They lose that game. They got worked by Duke at home at the McHale Center, lost to OU, lost to West Virginia. Both those teams have looked impressive since then, but they're 4-0 in the Big 12, including absolutely working West Virginia. Last week, they worked them beat them by 20 points in Morgantown, and then they beat UCF. But the thing is, Pete, it feels like they have leave a lot to be desired defensively. We saw Baylor just hold that Cincinnati team to 48, and all these Baylor fans talk about, well, it's because Cincinnati sucks. They suck. They can't throw it in the ocean. They gave up 67 to that Cincinnati team. That game you did with TCU, they gave up 80 there. They gave up 80 to UCF. Again, they gave up 100 to Wisconsin. This team is a little suspect defensively, but does Baylor have the firepower right now to actually capitalize on that? We've seen some tough games from Roach, some tough games from Nunn. You saw a good one from VJ Edgecombe.
In Arizona State, they're banging the drum like, hey, we stopped Nunn. And we stopped Roach. You know what I mean? Like they were, it was in the game notes about stopping Roach.
Really? Scott Drew, did you hear what Scott said after the game?
It was in the post-game notes. What?
Scott said, like, Jeremy couldn't throw it into the ocean tonight, which is he says it in his constructive way, but like, hey, Jeremy was just having an off night, but they've had a couple off nights in a row, those two guys. So I don't know if I'm
one thing about it with Jeremy, I will say, and I noticed this since at Cincinnati, Spatola noticed it more, before I did, was that he has like really been more of a facilitator for Edgecombe. Like there's a reason the guy was a captain at Duke for two years. You know what I mean? Like he's finding ways to get this guy who is a special guy, the basketball in positions where he's comfortable. And he's made Edgecombe a lot better. Back to Arizona, because that was your question.
Yeah.
When we had a chance to talk to Tommy Lloyd before the game against TCU, the guy just turned 50 years old. He's like at the top of his career, and then he has this awful non-con. And I think he was so stoked to get into the Big 12 schedule, almost like, not like I know something you guys don't, but I'm telling you, dude, there was a big time, like there was relief on his face before the ball even went up in the air against TCU. I think he knew his team was equipped to really compete in the Big 12 and to have a lot of success. And that non-conference schedule in itself was a monster. And like, for instance, he saw West Virginia on his schedule. He's like, that ain't happening again. You know what I mean? Like, I know this team. We're probably going to kill West Virginia. And they did. So, I think Tommy Lloyd feels good about his team. I think Baylor will play just enough defense to make like where they won't have to put on a fireworks display to stay in this game. I think it's weird. I just think you look at Baylor's schedule and I just think it's time for Baylor to lose. Like if you looked at
schedule
those three,
lost.
Well, hold on. If you looked at after the Iowa State loss, okay, if I showed you the 3 games and I said, you're going to go 2-1, you'd say, okay, I can handle that. Right.
And if you ask me which game they're going to lose, on the road in Arizona, that's probably not. It's probably still a stretch.
I don't predict Baylor's going to lose. I don't know enough like that. I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm saying if they did lose this game, you still come home, feeling pretty good about your program.
Sure.
But I guess I haven't checked like this point spread or anything. Maybe it's a game where Baylor's favored. I don't know.
I should have checked that too. But anyway, all right, let me ask you this before we close out the basketball portion of this, is that these two teams were both picked in the top 10 to start the year. They're both in the top 6 of the Big 12 right now. So, they're both kind of, as we've said, kind of finding their footing, finding their ways to win, which you would think would come in even a tough non-con schedule rather than a Big 12 schedule. But here we are. do these two teams have enough to compete for the regular season conference championship?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question. We're in a climate now where all these teams are still sort of finding their footing. And I think that outside of Iowa State, right? I'm thinking right now, I mean, like Kansas, they're the pack, right? And the pack being that second tier, Texas Tech, Arizona, Baylor. We could see them possibly vying for definitely a regular season championship.
How about this to close out basketball? Because I did think of one more. I had this question on a post game last week, and it's, kind of rearing itself again. Is the SEC better than the Big 12 right now in basketball?
Yeah, but I'll tell you what. Well, not necessarily. They are, but it's because of the net rankings, and it's because of a lot of the way that things work out scheduling wise. So at the end of the year, unfortunately, yeah, you're going to look at on paper and it's going to say, no matter, here's the crazy thing. And this is why they're trying to, some people would really like to see a change in scheduling and the way that the net works, because there's almost nothing the Big 12 can do now at this point. Now it's friendly fire, right? So how does the Big 12 become a better conference? Up until the tournament starts, there's nothing you can do to prove it, because all these non-conference opponents that you played in November and early December, those are the games, right, that are judging how the conferences are overall. So right now on paper, and as far as what matters, like seeding and stuff down the road, like, yeah, the SEC is a better conference. I still think if you were to drop Auburn in the Big 12, it'd be tough sledding. And I would rather be in the Big 12 than in the SEC.
Lest we forget, Auburn was 0-1 against the Big 12 last year. Just putting that out there. He's Pete Souza, Inside the 12, ESPN. Appreciate Pete joining today. Special thank you to Pete Souza for joining yesterday, as well as for today's show, taking a look ahead at that Baylor basketball matchup tonight, 10 o'clock tonight. Ugh. Look, this is what we bargained for in the new Big 12. And this might make me sound bad, but like if you're coming into our conference, can you afford to play a game at, I don't know, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock? Make it a little bit easier on the rest of us, where your bread is buttered, the central time zone. Just making a mockery of the greatest time zone in America. Anyway, we'll have something for you tomorrow in the evening edition. In the morning edition, we're going to talk some more football, and maybe, just maybe, Carson Hall will officially be on the staff by then. Thank you again for making it your first listen today and every day. We will see you tomorrow on your favorite show, actually later today on your favorite show, Locked On Baylor.